Well, this is a very exciting day for me to talk about debate prep for the presidential debates. And the reason I'm excited is I've spent the last 2 weeks in Europe and had a chance to get far enough away to think historically about what's going on and what it means and how to sort of frame all this. And I've watched with fascination as the elite media desperately seeks to protect Hillary, and as the elite media tries every way it can to suppress Trump and stop Trump from gaining ground. So you saw, for example, that Trump very effectively went to Louisiana with Governor Mike Pence, his vice presidential candidate. Hillary was hiding, raising money, of course. I didn't have time to go to Louisiana. Then you saw that when the president of Mexico invited both Trump and Clinton to come visit, Trump said yes, probably faster than Hillary could call her advisory meeting. And so Trump went to Mexico, and Hillary kept hiding and raising money. You have to wonder, how long will the media tolerate this? You've seen the longest period without a serious press conference, I think, in the history of presidential campaigns. And the press continues to put up with it as though, after all, it's just Hillary. We saw this last week, the new report that Bill Clinton has asked for more money from the taxpayers than any president in history. There's a post-presidency retirement fund, which I personally think ought to be abolished, which protects the presidents. They get Secret Service, they get all sorts of office money, they get extra money they can ask for. Bill has asked for about $16 million. It turns out apparently that the so-called private server may in fact have been a public server, because they may have used money from the taxpayer to pay for the server. Although my favorite item on the list I saw, and I have not investigated this in detail, but the news article suggested that they used taxpayers' money to fight bed bugs, which you would have thought somewhere in the millions of dollars of book contracts, the millions of dollars of speech fees, they probably could have fought their own bed bugs. But after all, these are the Clintons, and given a chance to rip off the taxpayer, why wouldn't they? And it occurred to me actually as I watched Bill and Hillary, various new revelations about all of the different emails that she did not turn over, including a number relating to Benghazi, all of the reports on the meetings that were apparently involving the Clinton Foundation, the request of the Clinton Foundation advisor that he be given a diplomatic passport, more and more information coming out about Cheryl Mills, the chief of staff, and Huma Abedin, her closest personal aide, and how much they were involved in trying to help the Clinton Foundation donors while she was Secretary of State. All these pieces coming together. I realized that Bill and Hillary Clinton are actually America's first grafters running for president. They have all the characteristics of classic grafters from movies you've seen. They lie to everyone, they try to steal from everyone. Anything they can do to feather their nest works. And you look at places like Haiti, where they were ripping off poor Haitians, where both Bill and Hillary's brothers were making money out of Haitians. It's really a level of heartlessness that's hard to imagine. So putting all that in context, and then watching the news media react to Trump's speech on immigration, which was a tough speech. It was a campaign rally speech. We've all seen Trump often enough in campaign rallies. We know his style. We know that he will be aggressive and noisy. And we know that he draws huge crowds. And part of it's circular. He knows people come to be entertained, so he entertains them. They know they're going to be entertained, so they show up. When have you seen a Hillary Clinton crowd outside of the convention? When have you seen a Hillary Clinton crowd that had 1/3 the energy of a Trump crowd? Well, that's partly his style, which is frankly not a very effective TV style, but it's a terrifically effective auditorium style. So he gave a speech, which he said, shock of all shocks, that he wanted to control the border, that he wanted to eliminate sanctuary cities, so cities could not refused to work with federal government on illegal immigration unless they were willing to risk losing all their federal aid, that he was prepared to focus on deporting criminal illegal aliens, which really I thought was an intelligent targeting of resources and something which I suspect most Americans would agree with. I mean, you go up to the average American and say to them, if we know somebody is here who's a convicted felon, do you think we should focus on getting rid of them before they commit felonies in the U.S.? Well, you have to be a Hillary Clinton liberal to think that that's a hard question. The news media, of course, went nuts. Said it was a terrible speech, that it ended his campaign. I mean, I read some stuff that I thought was illustrative of the level of panic and the level of paranoia, which is beginning to affect many of our newsrooms, but many of our newspapers and our television channels. And as I thought about it, I realized all of this has a great relation to debate preparation. There have been several articles now about Hillary, being Hillary, of course, as being studious and reading documents and studying exactly what she should say. And Trump, being Trump, is eating cheeseburgers and chatting with his friends, which I think actually may be the most effective debate prep he could do. A lot of folks thought I was a pretty good debater in 2012, and I always told them my two major debate coaches were my grandson, Robert, who at the time I think was 11, and his sister, Maggie, who was 13. And I found them to be much more helpful for most debates because they kept it simple and direct, and that's what you need. You don't need to get so wrapped up in detail that you think you're going to go to a TV quiz, and the more questions you can answer, the more points you win. People tune in to presidential debates to get a sense for how competent you are, how confident you are, whether or not you are reliable, and whether or not you are honest and trustworthy. And as I thought about debate prep for Trump, I realized that he is the first candidate in 36 years who needs a very unique form of debate prep. And the reason is very straightforward. Not since Ronald Reagan have we had a candidate who was totally outside the news media interpretation of reality. And so he's faced with two very different challenges. One is, in Hillary Clinton, he has someone who is going to be prepared with a straight face to say whatever she and her aides have decided she needs to say. They'll have focus grouped it, they'll have polled it, they'll have analyzed it, they'll have gamed it. And if they say to her, your job is to get up and announce that the moon is made of blue cheese, she will say it with total conviction, and she'll then cite 3 Harvard professors whose recent study proves authoritatively that the moon is made of blue cheese. And that raises a very interesting question. How do you debate somebody who's totally dishonest? Now, she doesn't have her husband's wonderful capacity to be dishonest with such fluidity that it feels like he's telling the truth. She's a little clunky. You can sort of tell watching her that she really knows down deep that's what she's telling you is baloney. Bill knew it was baloney, but he thought it was great baloney, and he thought you ought to like the baloney, and he was prepared to sell the baloney. And in fact, if you'd like, he'd eat the baloney with you, with or without mustard, to prove to you what a good baloney it was. She doesn't have that capacity. She's kind of like the school teacher who says, if I tell you the moon is blue cheese, you have an obligation to believe it, and if you don't believe it, I'm going to flunk you. I think that's not a particularly good political candidate style, but it's brought her a long way. She just raised apparently something like $143 million last month so she could put more dishonesty on TV and try to drown Trump with just sheer brute television advertising. So one, he has to understand he's going to go in to debate a person who he can't actually afford to listen to. Because if you listen to her, you're either going to get really pissed off and say something attacking her, or you're going to break up laughing because it's so stupid. Both of those are the wrong reaction. Reagan had some of that problem. We tend to forget Jimmy Carter was a very effective politician, not a very effective president, but a very effective politician. And in 1976, he won the Democratic nomination by beating a number of serious people. And then he beat Gerald Ford, who was the incumbent president. In 1980, Teddy Kennedy was widely seen as a very viable alternative, and Jimmy Carter beat him decisively for the nomination. So Carter, in the fall of 1980, was not a trivial person. He was not a laughable person. He was the incumbent president of the United States. And his goal was to make Ronald Reagan look unacceptable. Reagan, after all, was a movie star who'd made at least 2 movies with chimpanzees. Bedtime for Bonzo was one, and I can't remember the other one right now. He was also somebody who represented very conservative views, widely seen by the news media as too far to the right. And so Reagan had to prepare for a candidate who would say the most outlandish possible things. And they brilliantly came up with the phrase, "There you go again." And so Reagan would just step back from whatever Carter's nuttiest attack was and smile and say, "There you go again." And then he would give his answer. The second thing you'll learn if you read the transcript of the Reagan-Carter debate is that Reagan understood that he had to convince the average American that he was safe. He knew that in 1964, just 16 years earlier, the left had destroyed Barry Goldwater by making him seem unsafe, particularly on the issue of nuclear war, and had run a brilliant commercial in which a little girl is picking the petals. It's called the Daisy commercial. And she's picking the petals of a daisy, and they get a countdown, and then a hydrogen bomb goes off. And it was only ever run once, but it was so devastating that it sort of defined the campaign. And Reagan knew that Carter wanted to somehow convince people that Reagan was too dangerous to allow him to be near the nuclear button. Now, ultimately, Carter undermined his own case by going off on a long story about how the night before he had been talking with his daughter, who at the time I think was 13, and they'd had a long, serious discussion about nuclear war. And the average American tuning in kind of thinking, let me get this straight. You want us to think Reagan is unstable, but you're discussing nuclear war with a 13-year-old. And in a sense, Carter sort of delegitimized his own attack. Reagan came out of that debate, and Carter lost by a bigger electoral vote margin than any incumbent president in American history. Now we come to the Trump-Clinton debate. Trump has to understand first that he cannot allow Hillary to get under his skin. Hillary's staff will have watched every single debate. They'll have watched every single occasion where Trump got off on the wrong foot in public speeches or in press conferences. And they will have 5 or 10 things designed to get him off balance. And he needs to understand that his first job is to ignore him, not care about him, not let her get under his skin. If necessary, laugh at her. And figure out 1 or 2 phrases that he can fall back into that become normal. Turning to the audience or turning to the TV commentator and saying, "Isn't that just like lying, Hillary? I can't believe she said that." And then go on with his own thing. The second thing he has to do, though, is what Reagan did. Trump represents an alternative world. That's if you go back and you look at the elite media response to the speech on immigration. The elite media gets together, they go to each other's cocktail parties, they go to each other's graduations, they vacation together. They represent a very small enclave of very left-wing people who talk with very left-wing people, and they have a very common worldview. So, for example, almost 80% of the American people believe that a photo ID is a legitimate requirement to vote, because the average American believes there's a real danger of vote theft and a real danger of vote fraud. And certainly the evidence historically is that there are a substantial number of people. There was a guy in Southern California they found recently who has been voting consistently at every election, even though he died in 1964. So this is not a minor thing. In Philadelphia, the amount of vote fraud can literally be the margin of winning or losing statewide in Pennsylvania. Yet, if you talk about photo ID, the average reporter thinks, aha, racist. Because in their worldview, even though they're a distinct minority of the American people, almost everybody they talk to agrees with them. If you talk about sanctuary cities and that it's a bad idea. They promptly pivot to the idea of, well, do you really want the victim of a crime not to talk because they're afraid to admit they're illegal? And they give you the whole routine, because in their view, and I thought Trump captured this very powerfully the other night, the elite media believes it is the illegal immigrant who's the victim. Trump believes it's the American citizen who is the victim. Now, those are fundamentally different worldviews. Trump believes we should be thinking about Syrian refugees first from the standpoint of protecting American lives. Most members of the elite media believe we should see Syrian refugees as innocent people towards whom we should show massive compassion, and about whom we should not ask questions because it would be somehow inappropriate. So that kind of back and forth, you're talking about two very different visions of the world. Excuse me. And the truth is, Hillary Clinton fits within the news media's vision of the world. So the news media will be inclined to ask questions that inherently favor Hillary. It won't even be because they're biased. It'll be because they believe they're the truth. The news media believes, for example, that you can't build a wall. You know you can't build a wall. Well, that's baloney. Of course you can build a wall. You don't have to build a physical wall. In fact, ironically, it is Trump who's been saying recently you only need about 1,000 miles of coverage out of the 2,100-mile border. Because as you talk to various agents, customs agents and border patrol agents, they'll tell you, we know where we need to stop things. We know where you don't have to worry about it. Now, the media has not exactly picked up on the fact that Trump has, in fact, developed a more sophisticated approach. And so they just want to shrug it off and say, well, you can't build a wall. Well, of course you can. The Israelis have been very successful at it. Hungary recently was very successful. They reduced the amount of illegal refugees getting into Hungary by over 95% the first day, because they were serious people doing a serious thing. So you have to start and look at these kind of things. Trump's entire view about trade policy goes against the belief of most reporters. So they'll ask a question that is biased in the favor of free trade and won't even realize that they're biased. They'll just be reporting on the world as they see it. And so Trump has got to prepare both for Hillary, and he's got to prepare for the moderator. And he's got to assume that reframing the debate, after every question, he should take a deep breath and ask himself, is this question so wrong that I'm going to reframe it to the question I want, and not allow the news media to intimidate him? He has no obligation to answer an inadequate or a biased question, or a question designed to put him in a problem. He has every right to come back and say, you know, I did this. I was asked a question that implied that asking people to work was terrible. And I came straight back at him and said, look, you and I have a different view of the work ethic. I think if you're poor, the number one thing you need to learn to do is go to work. And if that means you go to work at McDonald's, that's fine. It means you go to work as the school janitor, that's fine. But the habit of learning how to work is central to avoiding poverty. Well, in that particular debate, we got about a 5-minute standing ovation because the entire audience sided with me on the importance of work against the moderator who'd ask an anti-work question. A good area to look at, where this will be fascinating, is Chicago. Last month was the most violent month in over 20 years. 90 Americans were killed in Chicago last month. Over 3,600 Americans have been killed in Chicago since Barack Obama was sworn in. Now, the news media elites behave as though there's nothing you can do about it. It's uncontrollable. And of course, it can't be the fault of the Democratic Party, which has been running Chicago now for 70 or 80 years. That would be wrong to think that it's the Democrats' fault. And yet, we have a clear historic record in our own lifetime. Rudy Giuliani became mayor of New York when the city felt ungovernable. He became mayor when Times Square seemed unsafe. He became mayor when the first thing you saw as you came across the bridge into Manhattan was squeegee men who would come out and wipe your car window with a dirty rag and demand $1. He took over that city, and with the brilliant leadership of Police Chief Bratton, they turned it all around almost overnight. Within weeks, they had gotten rid of all the squeegee men. Within months, they had gotten rid of most of the graffiti. They followed a policy of policing that was very, very effective. And the result was a dramatic decline in the murder rate in New York. If Chicago, over the last 7.5 years of the Barack administration, the Obama administration, if Chicago had had the same murder rate per capita as New York, several thousand people would be alive today. And yet liberals so much dislike what Giuliani did, are so unwilling to adopt sound conservative principles of policing, that they wring their hands, feel bad, and watch people getting killed with no effective result. The newest liberal gimmick is going to be to put a number on every bullet. Now, since many of the guns are stolen, since many of the bullets presumably are stolen or bought on the black market, why they would think this is going to have any impact is an example of being so out of touch with reality, it's unbelievable. But if Trump's asked a question about the inner city, he has to be prepared to come back and reframe the question, to point out that if you want to create jobs, you have to create safety, to point out that between Sheriff Clark, who's done a brilliant job in Milwaukee, between Rudy Giuliani, who's done a historic job in New York City, that we know how to do this. Sheriff Arpaio and Phoenix, who keeps getting reelected for a practical reason. The people of Phoenix believe they're safe. They believe they're safe because their sheriff does a tough job of focusing on criminals. Now, there are 3 examples that Trump could bring in and say, look, I care enough about Chicagoans, I want them to stay alive. You care enough about liberal ideology, you're willing to let them die. That's a big difference. And I think that's got to be the framework. He's got to over and over reframe the debate back to what he believes, not get sucked into the bias of the moderator, and every one of them will be biased, and not get sucked into this idea that he's got to answer Hillary or allow Hillary to bother him. This is not a fight about 2 personalities. This is an opportunity to reach virtually every American with a vision of a safer, better, more prosperous America, a vision of principles that work, and a vision of a president who is willing to go out and cut through the red tape and get things done. And I think their debate prep should not be traditional, inside the box, if she says A, you say B, that kind of stuff. The debate prep should be looking at Reagan, studying Reagan, looking at Thatcher, who is the other great leader who reframed the whole debate. And Trump should come in as the definer of America's future, not as the defender of whatever political gimmick they want to focus on that night. So, Joe Perez said, what advice would you give Trump for the debate? Well, Joe, I hope I just did it. Love to hear from you if you thought it made sense. I do think that Trump has a chance here to achieve a historic breakthrough in talking with all of the American people. It's one of the few occasions, these 3 debates plus the debate that Governor Pence will have with Senator Kaine, these are great opportunities because people from both sides tune in, and and the news media tunes in. So it's a great opportunity to firmly set the debate and firmly set the campaign in a very serious way. Bishop Rickard, how should Trump respond to personal attacks? Well, I'm maybe the wrong person to ask that. I think generally speaking, you're better off to just ignore them. I mean, who cares? This is about the future of America. It's about life and death for young Americans. It's about a country afflicted with an opioid epidemic that is killing people. More people died of drug overdoses last year than died in car wrecks. It's a country whose schools aren't working, where there are millions of children who don't have a decent future. It's a country faced with an implacable enemy in the invincible wing of Islam that wants to come and destroy us. I think it's better the more Trump is a historic figure and the less he's a personality, the stronger he is, because he represents a very profound break with a corrupt, decaying establishment whose policies have failed visibly and who are not prepared to govern the country. Michelle Starkey says, based on his performance over the past months, How can the American people know Trump will be the top diplomat and not go off the rails? I think on occasion he will go off the rails. I mean, Donald Trump's going to be Donald Trump. Your choices are simple. Hillary will be a calm, disciplined, professional, corrupt liar. If you're comfortable with that, you have a much higher guarantee of predicting Hillary. You know she and Bill will steal. You know they will use the government in ways that are inappropriate. You know they will exploit public office for private gain. You know they'll take care of all their cronies and their friends. And you know they'll lie about it the entire time they're doing it. Now, if that's the certainty you want, Hillary Clinton's your candidate because you can be certain what she's going to be like. You know that in Trump you have a brilliant, somewhat unpredictable entrepreneur of enormous achievement in private business who has remarkably won the Republican nomination against 16 other candidates, who at times is going to take a gamble. I thought it was totally Trump-like, and I tweeted this, that he would fly to Mexico immediately, taking up the offer of the president of Mexico, turn right around and fly back to give a speech on immigration reform, and do all of it the same day. He looked totally presidential in the press conference with the president of Mexico, and then he looked like a candidate when he was in Phoenix giving the immigration speech, but he managed to do all of it in less than 8 hours. Now, I think you have to expect that. He's going to be in, I think, Philadelphia today. He's going to be in Detroit tomorrow. I fully expect you're going to see Donald Trump will be in more inner cities, talking to more African Americans, trying to find ways to get to good education, safe neighborhoods, real jobs, than any Republican president in modern history, maybe more than all of them combined. That's different. It's unpredictable. And I think he will continue to be unpredictable. And by the way, when he's president, I think he'll keep our enemies off balance because he'll be unpredictable to them too. Stephen Chrétien, is Matt Lauer's connection to the Clinton Global Initiative disqualifying? I actually don't know what Matt Lauer's connection to the Global Initiative is, so I can't answer that one, Stephen, but we will look into it, and if you want to send us a note explaining it, we would look forward to hearing from you. Vicky Sue, I keep seeing posts where Trump will win the popular vote but lose the election because of the Electoral College. What is the truth of this? Well, there have been two occasions that I can remember, 1876 and the year 2000, where the candidate who got the smaller number of votes nonetheless won the Electoral College. But it's very rare, very unusual, and very unlikely. I think it's much more likely that the person who wins the majority of the vote will win the majority of the Electoral College. I'd be much more worried about getting Trump to a majority of the vote than I would be to worrying about the Electoral College. Our last question, Wayne Hennessy, you're a professional historian. Would you rank this election among not only Reagan-Carter but Lincoln-Douglas? They're not at all the same experience. Lincoln and Douglas debated in a series of extraordinary debates, which lasted an average, I think, of 3 hours each. Totally different style, different time and place, and that was running for the U.S. Senate. I think that this election is decisive in the sense that Lincoln-Douglas was, or in the sense that Reagan-Carter was, because you have not seen, even counting Reagan, I think you've not seen in my lifetime as big a choice as the work ethic, lean government, cut through the bureaucracy, protect America, put American interest first model of Trump versus the Clinton model. This is the widest choice we'll have seen maybe since McKinley ran representing modern industrial urbanism against William Jennings Bryan's rural populism in 1896. And I think by the time we get to mid-October, it'll be obvious how really big the gap is in foreign policy, in national security, in safety, in job creation, in attitudes towards government, in willingness to rethink everything in the inner city to help people. The gap's going to be really, really big, and there will be no election in modern times comparable. So I hope this is a useful starting point. As we get closer to the debates, I'll come back with a few other ideas. And I also am in the middle of reading an extraordinary book called Dreamland, which I'm going to spend an entire Facebook Live on in the near future. So look forward to a chance to share with you again. Thank you.